Hey everybody, this is Rykard here again, and welcome to the next video in my Pokemon Teams video series. If you're unfamiliar with the series, this is where I basically post a team for you all to see, explain its weaknesses, its strengths, and what it was designed to do, generally with some type of gimmick or central theme, such as in the previous video where I did a gravity team for 5th Gen NU. But this video is actually going to be all about getting you all started into the 6th Gen NU metagame that is still being currently developed through Smogon and Pokemon Showdown. So the goals of this team were to create an easy-to-use, balanced team that has all the tools to get anyone started in NU. Meaning that if you're just someone who typically just plays, OU, standard, whatever you want to call it, this team will be a great starting point to get you familiar with the tier and used to dealing with the Pokemon that you're going to be constantly seeing on your opponent's teams. Another goal is to be able to handle the majority of threats in the current NU tier. So with this team, you should be able to handle them pretty well overall and give you a very good starting point in terms of what you need to do in order to build another successful team for yourself in this tier. The next thing is to be able to deal with knockoff and entry hazard stacking. Knockoff is one of the most central moves in the entire 6th Gen metagame right now, so you pretty much always need to build a team that can deal with knockoff because everything will run it. There's even a couple of things on my team that use it. And also the ability to deal with entry hazards, as there are not too many rapid spinners or defoggers in NU that are actually very useful, and that makes entry hazard stacking from your opponent's standpoint very powerful, so you need to be able to deal with that some way. And then the last thing is to be able to put offensive and defensive pressure on your opponent, meaning that it is designed to allow you to get into as many good situations as possible to give you an advantage, whether defensively, such as being able to take a hit very easily from a certain threat on your opponent's team, or be able to bring in a powerful or fast attacker that will easily be able to handle something that your opponent might be using on their team. So with that, we're going to take a look at this team right now, and it is comprised of Vileplume, Audino, Spiritomb, Armaldo, SWANA, and Zebrika, and I will go into all of these sets more in depth right now. So when I was first coming up with this team, I really wanted to use a great physical wall that would be able to deal with some of the most common Pokemon I was seeing being used in NU as I was kind of spectating matches trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to use. And overall, it seemed to me that Vileplume would actually be the best Pokemon to use for this job, mainly because of the fact that the poison grass or the grass poison typing is really good for handling a lot of things, and also because of its moves and ability. Now, because I'm running a physical wall for Vileplume, we're going to be using a Bold Nature to increase its defense, and we're going to be using 252 EVs into its defense to max that out, meaning it is as physically bulky as it can possibly get. Also, we're going to put a bunch of EVs into HP, 208, and then 48 EVs into its speed, which if you watched my EV optimization video, I can explain exactly why this is there. Now, those 48 EVs that could have potentially been going into HP are going into speed instead, because with this, you're actually able to outspeed Golurk, which Vileplume normally would not be able to do. And that's really important because Golurk is, in my opinion, a huge threat in NU. It could also very easily threaten you with a iron-fisted Ice Punch, so that is something you definitely don't want to take, even though with the defense EVs you can take pretty well. But either way, being able to outspeed Golurk is very important in my opinion, so that's why I think those EVs are necessary for speed. Now also we're going to be running Black Sludge for recovery, and when I was talking about the ability before, Effect Spore is actually fantastic for any physical wall, because when your opponent makes contact with you, Effect Spore has a chance to activate and either put them to sleep, poison them, or even paralyze your opponent, which is amazing because you can spread status just by switching this thing in onto a physical attacker, and that's something you can't really get with any other Pokemon that easily in this tier right now, and that's why I think Vileplume makes such a great physical wall. Now for the moves, I wanted to put Sleep Powder on it just because this is probably, the best status in the game. If you can completely incapacitate your opponent for, however many turns Sleep Powder works for, why wouldn't you? It's such a great move. Granted, grass types can switch in on it, predicting it, but either way, if a grass type switches in on Vileplume, what's the grass type going to do to Vileplume anyway? I mean, even if you want to think about a special attacker that you're commonly seeing, such as Sceptile, which is, a powerful grass type that could easily take a Sleep Powder, even an HP Fire or HP Ice coming from a Life Orbed Sceptile doesn't even do that much damage to Vileplume. It does maybe like 30% or something like that, because it's not stab and it's not that powerful of a move. Plus, we're defensive. Even though we're in the physical defense, we can still take it very well. And then, obviously, Sceptile will probably die to a Sludge Bomb in the process. So, it's a really great move to have to, pretty much guarantee you're going to put something to sleep. Obviously, Sludge Bomb is on there for your main stab. It also helps you deal with Granbull very easily. You can pretty much switch Vileplume in on Granbull all day, and Granbull can literally do absolutely nothing to you, because even with a Fire Punch, it's not going to do that much because you're, physically defensive. So you can pretty much just have that safe switch the entire game if your opponent is using one, which is something really awesome. And then obviously Giga Drain for your Grass Stab, which also helps very much so for your recovery, alongside Synthesis, which is there to give you some more guaranteed recovery throughout the battle. But this Pokemon deals with a number of threats. It also is probably the one thing that I will always switch into if I predict my opponent to go for a knockoff, because this Pokemon doesn't really need Black Sludge, as it does have Synthesis and Giga Drain, and also because knockoff does make contact, there's the chance for Effect Spore to activate, as well as, being a physical wall, it's not going to do that much damage, and you can switch in all day on Shiftry and Lipards with this Pokemon, which is really awesome because of its defensive bulk and the ability, and just because it gets recovery anyway through 2 of its moves. So this is why I felt Vileplume was a essential Pokemon for this team, especially as my primary physical wall on this team. As for the next Pokemon, I picked Audino, which initially was actually Miltank, because I felt Miltank was just a stronger wall, but I actually found that I liked Audino a lot better after using it, and because of its utility through being able to Wish Pass and things like that. So Audino is primarily a special wall, so I was using a Careful Nature with it, and then obviously the Regenerator ability because of its increased survivability through the use of being able to gain health every time it switches back. And not many Pokemon in NU have that ability, so having this on Audino is amazing because it allows it to last a long time throughout battle. Also potentially Wish Pass a lot easier because it's always going to be at a pretty decent range of health to where it can live a hit and maybe switch out to something else and gain health upon switching out, while also Wish Passing to give that Pokemon health. And also obviously just be able to Toxic Stall things, because that's what Audino is really good at doing. But for the EVs, I'm kind of using a bit of a mixed defensive spread to an extent. So I'm running 216 HP EVs, 68 defense EVs, 200 special defense EVs, and 24 speed EVs. The speed is just because I don't like having things with no speed EVs. I know Audino will now always outspeed other Audino and other Pokemon in its speed tier, because most Pokemon, when they're this slow, they don't run speed, so it's kind of like a guaranteed Audino will outspeed something that it typically normally wouldn't, maybe, type thing. But typically, this EV spread is designed to give it a really good special bulk to take special hits. Obviously, for the item, again, we're going to be running a recovery item in the form of leftovers this time because we're not a poison type. And for the moves, I was using Knockoff, Toxic, Wish, and Protect. Now, Knockoff is there because Knockoff is the best move in the game, and because Audino isn't really a physical attacker, so I wanted to see how much utility I could give it. Now, the great thing about Knockoff is not only does it allow you to get rid of your opponent's item in this case, but it also makes it so that a Pokemon like Mismagius cannot set up all day on Audino behind a sub, because Knockoff will always break Mismagius' sub, meaning that you can pretty much just wall that Pokemon completely, because even if it does have Hidden Power Fighting or something like that, it's still not going to do that much to Audino because of its great special bulk, and Knockoff is pretty much like a 2 to 3 hit KO on it if it's not behind a sub, and that's really great. So that's just something to keep in mind. Toxic is there obviously because Audino is an amazing Toxic Staller, and this allows you to gain a defensive advantage against your opponents, because if they cannot break Audino as a wall and they're toxic, you are at a huge advantage, because not only, if Audino gets toxic as well, it can just switch out and recover health, but it can also use the opportunity, if it is in like a stall battle, to Wish Pass to something else that's not going to really take a lot of damage from your opponent, which will probably end up being like a wall as well if you are in kind of like a Toxic Stall-y type battle. So this gives Audino a huge advantage over a ton of other Pokemon, and obviously with Protect being used in combination with Wish and Toxic, you're able to stall out damage through Toxic while also simultaneously gaining the health recovery that Wish will give you. And also another Pokemon on this team that does not mind Knockoff whatsoever, because you have the recovery through Regenerator and Wish, so it really doesn't matter if this Pokemon's item gets knocked off whatsoever. And overall, I have definitely used this Pokemon with a lot of success, allowing me to give my more offensive Pokemon health throughout the battle by being able to safely Wish Pass into them, which happens a lot, especially if you know how to do it properly and not be so obvious about it like I've seen a lot of people do. But overall, Audino makes an amazing special wall for this team. And lastly, for my trio of walls that I have, including obviously Audino and Vileplume, is Spiritomb, which I have felt is probably a very, very underrated Pokemon right now, which is why it's in NU, and I don't expect it to be there forever, but it is right now, so, you know, you might as well make use of it, but we'll see, you know, how long it lasts here, because I think Spiritomb is just really freaking good. So, I wanted to use this Pokemon for, you know, its ability to Will-O-Wisp things, and also for its really great typing. It is now weak to fairy types, unfortunately, but that isn't too big of a deal because the only fairy types that really threaten it are pretty much easily handled by Audino or Vileplume, so that isn't really too big of a deal there. But anyway, for this Spiritomb, I'm using kind of a mixed defensive wall here. So I'm using a Careful Nature to increase its special defense, and then I am also using its ability Infiltrator, which obviously now is a lot better for those that don't know. Infiltrator makes it so that you go through subs now, so even if my opponent wants to set up behind a sub, I can still either burn it with Will-O-Wisp or damage it behind the sub regardless because of the Infiltrator ability, which is really fantastic for this Pokemon. For the EVs, I'm going to put 252 into HP, 100 into defense, 132 into special defense, and then 24 into speed, again to make it a little bit faster, and also give it some really well-rounded bulk overall. And for the item, I'm going to be going with Leftovers again, because this is a more defensive Pokemon. As for the moves, though, as I said before, we're going to be using Will-O-Wisp to burn it. Pursuit, which is amazing in the tier right now, because there are quite a few Psychic types or other Pokemon that are weak to Dark moves running around that you can easily trap and take out. For example, Mismagius is just completely checked 100% by Spiritomb, unless of course it is the extremely rare Trick Will-O-Wisp Mismagius, which I have ran into like twice. You don't see that too often, so Pursuit is definitely a very easy option to easily take care of that Pokemon without much trouble. Same thing with Golurk, Mesprit. Uxie won't die, but it will take a huge chunk of damage. Musharna can sort of be dealt with to an extent, even though Musharna is just really bulky. And, you know, a number of other Psychic types that you're typically going to run into, like Xatu or Beheeyem, all of them kind of lose to Spiritomb in terms of matchup, so Pursuit is an amazing move to have on it for this purpose. Along with that, we're also going to be using Sucker Punch, and this is the only Pokemon on my team that has priority, and Sucker Punch is just a great priority move, especially because it will allow you to hit things pretty hard even if they're behind a sub, which is, you know, really important because of the Infiltrator ability and everything like that. So I definitely needed something with priority on this team, and even though it can also learn Shadow Sneak, which is more reliable than Sucker Punch, I haven't had too much trouble with mispredicting Sucker Punch. I usually generally get it. I've never really run into a situation where my opponent predicted Sucker Punch and went for a different move or something like that, so it's generally a better option than Shadow Sneak, and also Shadow Sneak obviously is possible to be immune to because normal types are immune to ghost moves. And then the last move on this Pokemon is Pain Split, which is obviously a move for recovery, and even though it does have Pain Split, Spiritomb typically doesn't need it because I can generally Wish Pass into it from Audino, which happens a lot of the time. It's not guaranteed obviously, but Pain Split still is necessary, even though it doesn't technically need it, to allow it to kind of win a one-on-one situation more often than, you know, having to switch out and Wish Pass into it. But overall, Spiritomb is just an amazing Pokemon to use on this team, and it also simultaneously does threaten a lot of physical attackers because of the inevitable Will-O-Wisp that will be coming their way, which in many situations allows me to grab a free Pursuit because I know my opponent wants to switch out because of the Will-O-Wisp. So I'll Pursuit them when they switch out, and they'll take a huge chunk of damage in the process, which is something that you can use to kind of scare your opponent into switching because the Will-O-Wisp is so obvious that you would go for it. Up next, I have kind of the beginning of the more offensive portion of my team, and it's going to start off with Armaldo, which I'm actually running quite a bit of speed on, which you don't typically see on this Pokemon. However, I have found great success using this as it allows Armaldo to outspeed a ton of things that people don't normally expect it to, and that's a really good thing a lot of the time because it gives you a huge advantage against a lot of those opponents. So the first thing, obviously along with Jolly Nature, is that we're running Battle Armor to prevent critical hits from occurring, which is really good, especially if you want to bring in Armaldo to maybe deal with a Pokemon like Sawk, which typically does run maybe Storm Throw or even Pangoro, which will occasionally run Storm Throw, which always crits. Obviously, it won't now because of Battle Armor. Same thing for Frost Breath. You really don't want to switch in Armaldo on too many attackers because it's not meant to take hits, but it still can because it has a lot of good natural bulk, which has definitely helped it out in the long run. Now for the EVs, the HP EVs are a little wacky, which you might see right now because I'm not actually running max attack, even though I could. And the reason for that is because with 56 HP EVs, Armaldo reaches its next leftover number, which I think is important because it allows you to gain that 1 extra HP per turn, and that could add up over the long run. So I think that was very important. Then, you know, the minimal amount of attack EVs that I took out of it, it really doesn't affect its attack at all, but the HP being affected is kind of a significant thing. Now, obviously, with those attack EVs and the HP EVs, I'm running quite a bit of speed EVs, and 220 EVs in speed gives you enough speed to outspeed Pokemon, I believe, up to base 80 speed that don't have any speed investment, which in this case would typically be referring to a Pokemon like Mesprit, which Armaldo will now outspeed and potentially easily KO with its bug typing. And that's really great because it gives you a huge advantage of a Pokemon that you typically see quite often, as Mesprit is an amazing stealth rocker, as well as, you know, pivot with U-turn and everything like that, and it has good type coverage too. So this Pokemon could actually deal with Mesprit pretty easily as a result of the speed EVs and also the attack EVs making it quite a bit stronger. And then again, I'm running leftovers on this Pokemon because of the recovery, and obviously with the 56 HP EVs, it gives it the next number up in terms of leftovers recovery, which is really great. As to the moves, I actually did not have Stealth Rock on this Pokemon for a long time because I didn't think I really needed it. But then I realized that 2 Pokemon that were typically giving me trouble with this team were both weak to Stealth Rock, which were Typhlosion and Archeops. And Stealth Rock allows me to handle those a lot better because obviously Stealth Rock racks up over time, takes away 25% of their health every time they switch in, and that's really great because especially with Typhlosion, which is going to obviously want to be going for Eruption all the time, it allows me to mitigate some of that damage very easily, which I have been very appreciative of having, as it allows me to deal with that Pokemon a lot easier. But along with that, I'm using X-Scissor as your main stab bug type move, and then Knockoff and Rapid Spin as the last 2 moves on the set. And Knockoff, aside from being just a great move, obviously, works extremely well in combination with Rapid Spin, because if a Pokemon does want to come in and try to spin block me, I can just go for Knockoff, predicting that, and since obviously it'll most likely be a Ghost type trying to spin block, with the exception of Spiritomb, you can probably do a huge amount of damage to it because they would all be weak to Knockoff being a Dark type move. So that's a huge advantage that I think Armaldo has over other Rapid Spinners or Defoggers or anything. Well, actually Rapid Spinners, because Defog, it doesn't matter what your opponent's type is. But over other Rapid Spinners because of the fact that it does have the added Dark coverage that can deal with Pokemon trying to switch into it to block the Rapid Spin, which I think is a huge advantage. So overall, this Pokemon is the Pokemon to get rid of hazards for my team, as well as also being a powerful offensive Pokemon. It's the strongest physical attacker on my team, and it does a good bit of damage to pretty much anything that, you know, it gets in front of to deal with. And because of the added speed EVs that you typically don't see on it, it is able to outspeed quite a few things. And one of the most important things that I've been noticing is that it's been outspeeding a lot of Feraligators because they typically aren't running a lot of speed EVs. So you can actually X-Scissor Feraligator before it gets up a Swords Dance if it wants to, and then go for another X-Scissor if it does choose to go for Aqua Jet. Aqua Jet actually doesn't kill Armaldo from full health, even at +2, if you're a Feraligator, which is very interesting to note. So you can actually get off like maybe 80% of its health just by X-Scissoring it twice because you're faster than it, which is something that I found to be very effective. And also it allows Armaldo to easily switch in on Pokemon such as Shiftry and other things like that. Calm Mind Pokemon like Musharna and Uxie typically get shut down by this guy, which is very useful because Calm Mind is such a great move in this game, because most of the Pokemon that use it in NU are bulky Pokemon that can typically take physical hits. Up next, I have my Scarfer of the team, which is in the form of SWANA. Now, you might be wondering why I picked this Pokemon, and there are quite a few reasons, mainly because of the fact that it is faster than all of these Scarfed fighting types that are typically seen in the tier, such as Primeape and Sawk, and also it can very easily deal with Jinx, which is typically Scarfed as well because it does outspeed that. Another advantage of using SWANA is that if my opponent does get up the Sticky Web on my side of the field, SWANA being a flying type is actually immune to that, meaning that my fastest Pokemon will still be the fastest Pokemon on the field because it completely ignores Sticky Web because of its flying typing, which is a huge advantage that this Pokemon has over a lot of Pokemon. Now, I know obviously I do have a Rapid Spinner to deal with that, but just in case I don't get that opportunity to, I know that I can still rely on SWANA to outspeed a ton of things. But the great thing about it also is because of its type coverage, it is able to deal with a number of threats that I typically see, and also be able to deal with things that are pretty fast in the tier very easily. So the first thing that you're going to note is that I'm using a Timid Nature to increase its speed, as well as going with the Hydration ability. Now, even though this isn't a rain team, if my opponent is running one, I can definitely make use of this ability very easily by bringing in SWANA on a predicted status, or getting rid of a status that it might have already acquired. As for the EVs, though, I'm going to put 252 special attack EVs, 4 into special defense, and 252 into speed to give it its max special attack and speed possible. And then, obviously, as I said before, this is my Scarfer, so we're running a Choice Scarf. As for the moves, I eventually, after a long period of time, settled for Air Slash. I was using Hurricane, but it was just not reliable enough for me. It's great because of the added power, allows you to actually land some better KOs on your opponents, but Air Slash is just more reliable. It still can miss, but it's a lot more reliable, and the 30% chance to flinch is the 30% chance for Hurricane to miss. So, and since I was missing all the time with Hurricane, I expected to get a lot of flinches with Air Slash because it's the same chance. But along with that, I'm running Scald as my main water type attack over Surf, just because Surf is only 30 or 10 base power more now because they nerfed Surf last gen or this gen to be only 90 base power. So Scald with the added chance to potentially burn something is very useful. And that's really great. It's not too much of a power loss, so I definitely felt the sacrifice was needed for the chance to status things. And then Ice Beam for the added coverage. And the last move on the set is Sleep Talk, which is to potentially allow SWANA to sponge a Sleep Powder for my side of the field. Now, granted, I also do have the Vileplume to obviously take a Sleep Powder from anything, but if I don't have Vileplume or want to get rid of my opponent's ability to go for Sleep Powder again on something else after I, switch Vileplume out, I have this option with SWANA to take the Sleep Powder, as you can Sleep Talk with Choice Scarf and get any of your moves if you're asleep. So that's something important. Now, if you did want to switch things up just a bit, I would recommend, if you don't feel the need to run Sleep Talk, to actually run Hurricane in this spot so that you have both Air Slash and Hurricane as needed. There weren't actually too many things that I was running into that were running sleep-based moves, even though there are quite a few things in NU that can get them. I just wasn't seeing them too often. So Sleep Talk kind of was becoming an obsolete move, so you can actually run Hurricane in that spot if you want to. But overall, as a Scarfer, SWANA definitely has proved to be very useful, allowing it to outspeed a ton of Pokemon and have really good type coverage to deal with a lot of things that my opponent might be packing on their team. As for the last Pokemon for my team, I decided to select Zebrika because out of all of the electric types that also have the Lightning Rod or Volt Absorb ability, Zebrika is the fastest. And I know that Raichu did get a speed boost this generation, being base 110 speed now instead of base 100, and it is a little bit stronger in terms of special attack than Zebrika is, but the speed that Zebrika gets, I feel, is a huge advantage, because whereas Raichu would speed tie with things such as Archeops and Jumpluff and Tauros, Zebrika will just outspeed completely without any trouble. Also, Zebrika is the only electric type that can outspeed Floatzel, aside from Electrode, but because, as I said, it has the Lightning Rod ability giving me the electric immunity, I felt that Zebrika was the most useful out of all of them. So, with this, we gave him a timid nature to increase its speed but lower its physical attack, and then obviously the Lightning Rod ability. And for the EVs, we put 252 EVs into special attack, 4 into special defense, and 252 EVs into speed to give it its max special attack and speed possible. And for the item, I'm running an expert belt on this, typically because I have seen a lot of Zebrikas be choice specs. So expert belt kind of hides the fact that it is not choice specs very easily, potentially giving me an advantage if my opponent predicts something and thinks they can stay in when I can really just freely switch up my moves. And Zebrika has some pretty great type coverage, mainly because of the fact that it does get the Overheat move, which typically is not seen on any other electric type, obviously except for, Rotom. But anyways, Discharge is chosen over Thunderbolt just because of the added chance of paralysis. It's really not that big of a damage range difference, so I think Discharge it's been working out. I've never failed to kill something because of Discharge thus far, and also the chance to paralyze is very nice. Overheat, obviously, as I said, for really good type coverage with discharge, and also hidden power grass to give you some really good type coverage overall. And that allows you to obviously deal with things like lantern a little bit easier, as well as seismitoad, which is very commonly seen. And then lastly, Volt Switch to give you the switch initiative against your opponent, which is very useful for this Pokemon because it allows me to kind of easily switch into a number of different things on my team. And because I have so many great walls on this team, as well as other threatening physical or special attackers, this Pokemon has proven to be extremely useful in allowing me to gain an advantage on my opponent. But anyways, everybody, that is it for this team. So I hope you enjoyed my explanation on all the members of it and kind of how I went about building it. For those of you that are looking to get into this tier, I really recommend trying this team out to kind of get a feel for the things that you're going to be seeing very often. And for those that are more concerned with maybe laddering, trying to get to the top of the NU tier ladder on Showdown, this team has actually done really well for me. When I was trying to ladder with it, I got to about 1,500 points, which is pretty decent. Just by using this team, which I personally don't think is like the best team ever, but it's a really good starting point. So the fact that I did this well with a team like that really surprised me, to be completely honest. But for those that are looking at the ladder, this would be a really good starting point to allow you to kind of build off of and make even better for you to use in terms of being able to try to beat more opponents and be even more of a threat in the NU tier. And for those that are just looking to get in, obviously give us a shot. But for those that are wanting to use it, there's a link to this team in a paste bin below so that you can copy and paste it into Showdown for ease of access. But anyways, that is it for this video, everyone. So as always, take care, goodbye, and I will see you all next time.